All right, let's put the women and children in bed and go looking for dinner. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now. I want to remind you to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We're the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. Also want to remind you to like and subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on YouTube. We want to get up to 500 likes for each and every show. And also, in addition to hitting the like button on YouTube, hit the hype button so we can create the palpable buzz needed to spread the word on Inside College Basketball Now from coast to coast like butter and toast. And just a reminder, we will be coming to you each and every Monday at 1 o'clock Eastern, and then we are also going to be bringing you additional episodes each week featuring exclusive interviews with some of the biggest and best names in the college basketball space. Again, a reminder, we are now in the middle of our new coaches series, so over the next month and a couple of weeks in addition to that, we are going to continue to catch up exclusively with some of the new head coaches who were hired during this recent cycle in 2026. And again, if you can't get with us for any of these live shows on Monday, we also want to encourage you to make us part of your morning workout and also maybe your commute home on Apple or Spotify, because we need an army with us for each and every show here on Inside College Basketball Now, and we need you to be all you can be. So a busy show here today on CBS Sports Network, and I want to start, as always, with three big things. And the first big thing I want to get to today is what we talked about last week, and that is the skeleton of a 76-team NCAA tournament. Now, last week it was really important to me to get out all of my feelings on this topic, because this was something, again, that had been building for an awfully long time, not just on this show, but on every single platform that college basketball was discussed. And I needed last week's show as a therapy session. I needed last week's show as a canvas to paint on, to have a place to get all of my thoughts and feelings out. But I thought back at the conclusion of last week's show, and I spent some time after we wrapped up last week's show and I started to prepare for today's show here on CBS Sports Network, and I thought back to one of my favorite movies, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And I thought about the flashback in the start of the movie when River Phoenix plays a young Indiana Jones, and he goes out of his way to try and save an artifact from a group of bad guys. And the group of bad guys wind up getting the artifact back. And somebody says to a young Indiana Jones, "You lost today, kid, but you don't have to like it." And that's kind of how I feel now about NCAA tournament expansion. So as somebody who likes to think that he is in his 40s and always maturing, I don't know if my wife would agree with that, but that's how I feel internally, I am now choosing, as far as this topic of NCAA tournament expansion, to look forward as to what an NCAA tournament would look like with 76 teams. As Franklin D. Roosevelt, our former president, once said, there are many ways of going forward, but only one way of standing still. So we go forward right now, and we look at what a 76-team bracket might look like starting in 2027. So in an exercise of critical thinking, a couple of days ago, I literally went through and thought about what type of representation we might see from the major conferences starting next season if 76 participants were going to be a part of March Madness. And here's what I came up with. We have right now still a number of teams in a number of leagues that are going to be vying for spots at the mid-major level in a one-bid conference. That is not going to change. But as you can look at the numbers that I have accumulated, the power conferences are still going to eat up the majority of the bids. And as we look, obviously, at the projection for what I have forecasted for the 2027 NCAA tournament, we look deeply at the power conferences. The ACC had 8 teams in last year's NCAA tournament. Things could always change at the power conference level, but I am projecting 8. I think that's a fair number for the ACC in 2027. The Big 12 had 8 teams last season in the NCAA tournament. I think you have to look at 10 teams for the Big 12, getting 2 more with the additional slots in the NCAA tournament. The Big 10 had 9 in 2026. I would bump it up to 10 in 2027. The SEC only had 10 teams last year. I'm going to go with 12 in 2027. The Big East had 3 for the second time in a 3-year stretch. I'm going to double their input and go to 6 teams. The A-10, again, I have as a 2-bid league this year. And then the Pac-12, the new Pac-12, I'm going to slot in with 3 bids. That is an interesting league to look at when you take into account things moving forward. I think there are a couple of big picture storylines here that you have to look at when you are looking at NCAA tournament expansion. If you are one of the Power 4 conferences, the ACC, the Big 12, the Big 10, or the SEC, anything less than double-digit representation in the NCAA tournament should be considered a disappointment. Because I think if you're looking at these conferences right now, the Big 12 had 8 in a 68-team bracket. It has to get 10. The Big 10 got 9. It would hope to get, obviously, at least 10. And the SEC had already had 10. I think with what we're seeing, obviously, with Will Wade going back to LSU, you would expect that would be another bid for the SEC, which, again, has gotten a whopping 24 teams in the last 2 NCAA tournaments. Another thing that is a big storyline with NCAA tournament expansion and where these bids are going to come from, the Big East. A conference that, in my opinion, is straddling a fence. It's either going to recalibrate itself and get the type of representation that it was getting a couple of years ago in the NCAA tournament, or it is going to drift further and further away from the power conferences. The Big East had 3 teams in the NCAA tournament in 2 of the last 3 years. It has to get 6 in 2027 at least. And I think if you look at the reinforcements that the league has made, you would expect that to be a viable opportunity. Providence has had a very good portal cycle with Brian Hodgson. Xavier has had a very good portal cycle with Richard Pitino. Alan Huss, who's going to be a guest on this show, the Creighton head coach in the next couple of weeks, has done very nicely at Creighton. He was also there at Creighton in the Blue Jays program as the head coach in waiting, so there's a little bit less of a transitional period. And we have to wonder if Shaka Smart can obviously fix the gap year for Marquette and get the Golden Eagles back to the NCAA tournament. I firmly believe, obviously, UConn, St. John's, and also Villanova will be in the NCAA tournament. But 2027 and the 26-27 season is a massive, massive year for the Big East. The Big East isn't just losing its commissioner in Val Ackerman, it's also losing its associate commissioner in Dan Leibovitz, who is now the new commissioner of the Atlantic 10. So the whole administrative line in alignment of the Big East is going to look completely different in 26-27. You are also, as I keep referencing, going into a situation where you are trying to get more than 3 bids in the NCAA tournament. The Big East has had 3 in 2 of the last 3 years. You know what you're going to get at UConn as long as Dan Hurley's the coach. Rick Pitino at St. John's means an NCAA tournament team. In the last 2 years, it has meant a team that has either been a 2 seed or a 5 seed. Villanova lost to Caden Lewis to Miami, did well, though, in my opinion, getting Devin Royal to transfer, getting Kwame Evans to transfer from Ohio State and Oregon, respectively. Kevin Willard has enough to get Villanova back to the NCAA tournament. But you got to put double the representation on top of that. In a 76-team tournament, the Big East needs, in my opinion, to get at least 6 teams in the field. Another thing I want to point out when we start thinking about where bids could come from in the NCAA tournament with a 76-team field, I think there could be outlier years for the Mountain West and the West Coast Conference. Maybe once in a while, once every 3 or 4 years, those could be a 2-bid league. I think it's going to be a lot harder for the West Coast Conference without Gonzaga in the league and without Randy Bennett at St. Mary's. I think it's going to be a lot harder for the New Mexicos and the Nevadas and the UNLVs and the Grand Canyons to be in a multi-bid league. I still like the makeup of those leagues, but I think it's going to be really difficult to schedule your way to being a two-bid league. The league I'm looking at that to me has an infrastructure in place to be a multi-bid league, and it could be more than just two bids, is the new Pac-12. Now, this is something I also wanted to point out again because I referenced it last week, but there was so much to get to when I was airing out my thoughts on NCAA tournament expansion. I don't know if I hit it home enough. We have obviously read and we have listened to the announcements that the NCAA tournament is expanding to 76 teams, and the people from the periphery, that might mean an additional 8 spots, but it's not an additional 8 large spots. It's 7. Because with the new Pac-12 starting next year, that means another automatic qualifier is going to go to a conference that was not in full effect last season. So now you have a new league in the Pac-12, which means there's going to be 7 at-large berths additionally available, still obviously more than there was last year. But I look at the new Pac-12 with Gonzaga, who's a top 10 team, with San Diego State, with Utah State, with Boise State, with Colorado State. I think there is going to be a crop of teams in this league who obviously did really well in the old Mountain West that are going to be able to manipulate a resume to be good enough to get to the NCAA tournament. Look, San Diego State, like a lot of teams at the non-power conference level, has lost transfers to power conference programs. Magoon Guath left San Diego State and went to DePaul. Taj DeGorville left San Diego State and went to Nebraska. B.J. Davis left San Diego State and went to Creighton. But I will say this. The culture and the infrastructure in that program is always really sound with Brian Dutcher, and he obviously was a disciple of Steve Fisher. San Diego State is still a brand that's going to get high-level non-conference opportunities. San Diego State is in the Players Era Festival. San Diego State is also, again, going to have the luxury of playing Gonzaga now twice a year. Now, another thing about the new Pac-12 I want to point out. The new Pac-12 is going to play a 16-team conference schedule with a double round-robin format. That means, we have to remember, that there are 16 non-conference games for those programs to schedule with. If you go back in time and you look at what happened with the Atlantic 10 now 13 years ago, 12, 13 years ago, and 13 and 14, this is how the Atlantic 10 was able to put together a 5-bid performance in the NCAA tournament in 2013 and a 6-bid representation in 2014. Non-conference scheduling flexibility. If Utah State, Boise State, Colorado State can just schedule enough quality games to get their numbers in the right place, they are going to benefit from having a major quad one opportunity against Gonzaga 2 times in the regular season, and also another quality team in San Diego State. So those are 2 things there you have to keep in mind if you're looking at the new Pac-12. I have the new Pac-12 projected to get 3 teams in the NCAA tournament starting in 2027. But this is only May. I've spent a lot of time here on Inside College Basketball now the last couple weeks, talking about the fact that the only blue bloods that are truly remaining and operating right now at the blue blood level are Duke and UConn. But one thing I want to point out is this. There is a program operating at a blue blood level from a recruiting perspective that is not a traditional blue blood, but the head coach was once at a traditional blue blood. Who am I talking about? We'll pick that up when we return. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network. All All right, Jon Rothstein back here on Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network. As I referenced right before the break, one of the things I've been talking about the last couple of weeks is we don't really have many blue blood programs in college basketball other than UConn and Duke. But with that said, NIL and the transfer portal, and this is the second big thing I want to get to in this show, NIL and the transfer portal has leveled out the talent pool in college hoops, but it has not slowed down John Calipari at Arkansas. And to me, this is something that needs to be amplified. This is something that needs to be talked about. Because in a time right now where we are seeing, according to the rankings that I am doing every day, Kansas, North Carolina, and Kentucky ranked outside the top 25 in the Rothstein 45, which I post at approximately 9 a.m. Eastern every day on Twitter. Arkansas, a program led by John Calipari, isn't just surviving in the NIL transfer portal era. It is flourishing at a high level. The Razorbacks have the number one recruiting class right now in 2026. The Razorbacks are coming off back-to-back appearances in the Sweet 16. And you forget about this a little bit because John Calipari was at Kentucky for 15 years. But John Calipari built UMass into a program that was number one in the country, went to the Final Four 30 years ago in 1996. John Calipari built Memphis into a program that went to the Final Four in 2008, and in 06, 07, 08 made at least the Elite Eight of the NCAA tournament. And now we are seeing, not to say that Arkansas does not have a tradition-rich program, because the Razorbacks were great under Nolan Richardson, winning a national championship in 1994. The Razorbacks obviously were great under Eddie Sutton, and the Razorbacks were great under Eric Musselman, who led Arkansas to back-to-back Elite Eight appearances in 21 and 22. But Arkansas is again thriving in this new era, and that's a credit to the head coach, John Calipari, who again has Arkansas right now in a much better position than the program he left in Lexington, and that's the University of Kentucky. And it's not just in a better position than Kentucky. Arkansas has a roster right now that a lot of the quote-unquote blue blood programs in the sport would take in a heartbeat. Arkansas's recruiting class, which I referenced a couple of minutes ago, number one in the class of 2026, features four prospects. Jordan Smith, J.J. Andrews, Abdu Torre, and international prospect Mika Miranen, who are all ranked in the top 20 of the 2026 class. Jordan Smith is the best guard in the 2026 class. Arkansas also has landed a commitment from Jeremiah Wilkinson, a transfer from Georgia, who is thought to be, obviously, one of the top guards in the transfer portal, averaged over 17 points per game last season. Now, Arkansas, to me, is a team right now that is on the cusp of being a top 10 team to start next season. I think the Razorbacks are a big short from being a really, really good team. But if you're looking right now at the SEC entering next season and you're looking at the forecast, you would obviously put Florida in the one hole because they're the number one team in the country entering next season as long as Ruben Chinilu comes back to school. I think you'd put Sean Miller in Texas at number 2, and then Rick Barnes in Tennessee maybe at 3. But Arkansas is clearly a top 4 team in the SEC to start next season, and Arkansas could be even higher than that if it were to add another big man here late in the process. Now, with that said, Arkansas is still waiting on a couple of decisions over the next couple of weeks with the NBA draft early entry process. 2 players from Arkansas, Malik Thomas and Billy Richmond, are going through the NBA draft combine that is this week in Chicago. Malik Thomas, from everything I'm seeing, looks to be potentially a late first-round pick. Billy Richmond, nowhere near the first round. I would expect Billy Richmond to come back and be one of the great utility players in college basketball next season. Malik Thomas, I think, is a little bit more 50-50. Billy Richmond obviously has not made his decision public yet, but that's something to monitor. If Arkansas got these players back, the Razorbacks would have one of the deepest perimeters in the sport next season. But if Arkansas just got one of these players back, and I would think it's more likely that Billy Richmond would return to school than Malik Thomas, you would still have a perimeter that would feature Jeremiah Wilkinson, the transfer from Georgia, who averaged over 17 points per game last season in the SEC. You would think, obviously, Jordan Smith is going to be firmly in the usage department, and Billy Richmond, and Abdu Toure, and J.J. Andrews. There is going to be at least 4 or 5 quality players for Arkansas at the 3 perimeter spots. And with this unit, as long as you get one of those 2 players back, Arkansas should, in my opinion, be firmly on a path to be a top 16 seed in the NCAA tournament and have a path to go to the second weekend for the 3rd straight year under John Calipari. Now, I know that Kentucky fans still obviously have certain feelings about John Calipari because of the frustration that they felt when Kentucky had a number of early exits from the NCAA tournament. But I'll tell you a story. I was at a Syracuse practice years ago, and I was sitting with Jim Boeheim, and we were just chopping it up, as you do, during a practice when you're visiting with coaches. And we were just talking about the highs and lows of coaching in the NCAA tournament. And he told me, he said, do you think you are going to coach for 40 years and never have bad losses in the NCAA tournament? It's just what comes with the territory. John Calipari was the head coach at Kentucky for 15 years. 2009, 2010 season, lost in the Elite Eight to West Virginia. 2011 Final Four. 2012 National Championship. 2013, Nerlens Noel hurts his knee. You obviously missed the tournament that year. 2014 National Title game. 2015 lose to Wisconsin in the Final Four, finished 38-1. 2016 lost to Indiana in the round of 32. 2017 Elite Eight lost to North Carolina. Luke May hit the shot at the buzzer. 2018 lost to Kansas State. A lot of missed free throws from P.J. Washington in that game. 2019 Elite Eight lost to Auburn in overtime. 2020 no tournament, but the team prior to COVID with Emmanuel Quickley and company was 25-6. And then things got off the tracks a little bit in terms of the way the season's finished. 2021, during COVID, no NCAA tournament. 2022, 2 seed, lose to St. Peter's. 2023, you lose to Kansas State in the round of 32. And then 2024, the loss to Oakland in the round of 64. I understand those late losses frustrate a lot of Kentucky fans. But the bottom line is this. Arkansas is in position right now to start next season as a top 15 team. And what we are seeing is this is a byproduct of somebody who is not just the best recruiter of the modern era, but is also doing an underrated coaching job so far, in my opinion, at Arkansas. And look, there are people who know a lot more basketball than me, but I will firmly remember Jay Wright, our friend and colleague, when he was doing stuff here at CBS 2 years ago, when Arkansas started 0-5 in the SEC, and John Calipari got that team to the Sweet 16, Jay Wright said, that's the best coaching job that John Calipari has ever done in his career. So we will see what the future holds for Arkansas with Billy Richmond, with Malik Thomas. If none of those guys come back, Arkansas is going to be really, really young in 2 spots on the perimeter, but really, really talented. If one of those guys come back, Arkansas is going to be right there in the mix, in my opinion, to be a top 10, 12 team to start next season. And it will be better if it can add one more big man between now and the start of next year. Want to get to some other stuff as it pertains to the NBA draft process. Now, this has changed a great deal over the years because prior to NIL, we would see a lot of these players enter the NBA draft process, go through the process, and legitimately have to decide if they wanted to stay in the NBA draft or start a pro career in the G League or overseas because we didn't have NIL in college basketball. That has drastically changed over the last couple of years because now kids can get lucrative NIL deals to come back to college. So I'm looking at 3 players that are currently in the transfer portal that could have a major impact on college basketball if they return to school next season. Tunde Yesufu at Baylor, I spoke a little bit with his agent before we got on the air today. Obviously, the goal is to remain in the NBA draft. He wants to be a first-round pick. That seems to be conflicted from what you look at. He sometimes is more in the late 30s. He also could be somebody in the late 20s. More we will find out this week in Chicago. But I feel like Yesufu's desire, and I know from talking to people, his desire is to stay in the NBA draft. He is in the transfer portal. Obviously, if he became available and he withdrew from the NBA draft, a lot of schools with deep pockets would want to be in a situation where they could obviously be in play with him. UCLA has been linked to Yesufu since the moment he put his name in the transfer portal. Also, don't discount a program like Kentucky from throwing a big offer. Now, Milan Momcilovic from Iowa State is another player who is in the transfer portal who is going to command major interest. He is not projected as a first-round pick. This is a guy that made 136 three-point shots last season. This is what I've gathered. St. John's has obviously shown major interest in Milan Momcilovic. So is Kentucky. So is Louisville. So is UCLA. St. John's is still trying to add another player of significance after losing Masamba Diop to Gonzaga a couple of weeks ago. St. John's had great success last year with a three-forward lineup with Dylan Mitchell, Bryce Hopkins, Zuby Ejiofor. All three are gone. Donnie Freeman, the Syracuse transfer, is in tow. And so is Ruben Prey, who obviously played last year, had a great game against Duke in the Sweet 16. Rick Pitino wants one more piece up front. Kentucky just trying, obviously, to add as many quality players as it can after what has been a disappointing portal cycle for the Wildcats that has been headlined thus far by Washington transfer Zoom Diallo and Furman transfer Alex Wilkins. Now, Alan Graves from Santa Clara is another player that I'm seeing rising up the draft boards. Graves, I've said for weeks, if he goes to college basketball next season and withdraws from the draft, I expect will wind up at LSU. But Alan Graves now is somebody who is trending up as we set upon Chicago and the NBA draft combine. One of the things that's been consistent with what I was talking about with the three guys that are in the portal was UCLA was mentioned with both Yesufu and Momcilovic. UCLA has been in play with several big-name prospects, John Blackwell, Matt Abel. The Bruins feel like they need one impact player to be a legitimate 10 or 12 team to start next season. And if you look at the lineup for UCLA right now, you have Trent Perry, who should be an all Big Ten player next year as a junior, had a great sophomore year. Jalen Petty, one of the more under-the-radar pickups in the portal, averaged 10 points a game as a freshman at Texas Tech. Eric Daly's back for his senior year. He was a 14-7 guy late in the year when he moved to his more natural position at power forward. And then you've got a two-headed monster up front of Xavier Booker and Auburn transfer Philip Jovic at the 5. UCLA has a spot open on the wing and has resources allocated on the wing to pay a player significantly. But the question is, are the Bruins going to be able to procure either Momcilovic or Yesufu? A couple of other bullet points to keep an eye on this week in Chicago as it would pertain to college basketball next season. These players are not in the transfer portal, so if they come back to college basketball, they are going to go back to their respective teams. Abuka Okori at Stanford is projected to be a late first-round pick. He's somebody who had a great freshman year, obviously is fixated on obviously trying to stay in the draft, as all these kids are chasing their dreams. If he comes back next year, Stanford is a major story. If not, it's a rebuilding job for Kyle Smith. Tyler Tanner at Vanderbilt was one of the reasons why the doors were so good last season under Mark Byington. He has said, according to reports, that he's doing whatever he can to stay in the NBA draft. He has not made a public declaration yet. Obviously, if he comes back, he's a preseason All-American. Vanderbilt's a top 25 team to start next season. Andrei Stojakovic is somebody who announced that he was going to come back to Illinois, was a key cog in that Final Four team last season. Illinois has a lot back, but obviously could use Stojakovic if it indeed to chase a second straight trip to the Final Four. Amari Allen at Alabama is another player who's projected to be a late first-round pick. He would be an all-SEC player if he came back to Tuscaloosa. And the last one to me is where things get really interesting, and that's Kentucky's Malachi Moreno. Because talking to NBA people the last couple of weeks, they think there's a real shot that Moreno could wind up playing his way into the first round of the NBA draft in 2026, and that would be a devastating blow for Kentucky. It has not been a great portal cycle for Mark Pope, but Malachi Moreno is somebody that if he came back next season, I'd have him immediately on my national breakout list. He could be an all-SEC player. That is a big decision to watch this week. We'll continue here on Inside College Basketball Now with Jon Rothstein on CBS Sports Network. We do not sleep in May. Welcome back to Inside College Basketball Now with Jon Rothstein here on CBS Sports Network. We continue right now with our third big thing, and shouts to UConn coach Dan Hurley. Dan Hurley keeps raising the bar with UConn's non-conference schedule. The schedule last year was the best in the history of UConn basketball from a non-conference perspective. This schedule is better, and you can see right there the Murderers Row lineup. Michigan in Boston at TD Garden. That is a rematch of the national championship game. Ohio State is the start of a home-and-home series. Duke in Vegas, at Arizona. Illinois in a return game at the United Center. Kansas at home. That's the back end of a home-and-home series. And then Virginia at Madison Square Garden. This is the amazing thing when we look at that schedule. The team that has the worst preseason rating of all those teams, according to the Rothstein 45, which again I post every day at 9 a.m. Eastern on Twitter, it's Kansas. Kansas is the team with the worst rating. All three teams that were in the Final Four, Arizona, Michigan, and Illinois, UConn is playing. UConn is playing Duke in Las Vegas on Thanksgiving Eve, the night before Thanksgiving, in a heavyweight matchup, one of the most anticipated non-conference games we've seen in years in college basketball. UConn is also going to do something that I think is really, really smart from a scheduling perspective, and I've said this for years, and we had Dan Hurley in the studio promoting his book before the season last year, and I firmly felt that UConn, because of its massive, massive following in the Northeast, should every single year play a game at Madison Square Garden and play a game in Boston. And that's what's happening for the second straight year. UConn played BYU in Boston last year, and this year is going to play Michigan in a rematch of the national championship game. And then UConn is going to play Virginia, a team that I would think right now would be the top challenger to Duke in the ACC based upon what's coming back for Ryan Odom's squad. Chance Mallory, to me, is going to be an absolute star as a sophomore. Sam Lewis is back for Virginia, and you also have to like up front that you're getting back Testerita and Johan Grunlow. So you got four key players back for Virginia off a team that won 30 games and obviously went all the way with Tennessee to the wire in the second round of the NCAA tournament. Now, Dan Hurley deserves a lot of credit for doing this at UConn. I do want to give credit, though, to a couple of other coaches who also continue to schedule at a high level. Duke's John Shire and Gonzaga's Mark Few, who has always scheduled at an elite level, and he's had to do it because Gonzaga has been in a non-power conference. John Shire as well, obviously adding a ton of heavyweight games. He'll be in the ACC SEC Challenge. He will be in the Champions Classic, and he is also playing those three mega games as part of that Amazon deal. Duke is playing UConn in Vegas, playing Michigan at Madison Square Garden, and also going to play Gonzaga at Little Caesars Arena in Detroit next season as part of that Amazon deal. So John Shire continues to schedule at a high level too. With UConn, I think it's also a little bit different. when you look at the way they schedule compared to a team like Duke, because let's face it, UConn has not had the plethora of quad one opportunities that it has needed the last couple of years in the Big East. In 2 of the last 3 years, the Big East only got 3 teams in the NCAA tournament. Yeah, I'm going to keep saying that. So this is why UConn now has completely augmented and amplified the strength of its non-conference schedule. And this is why, another reason why the Big East has to start getting 6 or 7 teams into the NCAA tournament is because long-term you have to keep UConn. I can tell you without hesitation that UConn is still very much on the radar long-term of the Big 12. And it wouldn't shock me as if the Huskies got a phone call from the Big 12, the Big 10, or the ACC, they might be out the next day. So it's really imperative for the Big East to step up its game and get 6 or 7 teams into a 76-team tournament. We'll put a bow on that for now, but I want to hear from you. I want to get into our social media portion of this show on Inside College Basketball Now. When we return, we will check your questions on Twitter. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network. All right, Jon Rothstein back here on Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network. Time now for our social media portion of the show. Send me your questions on Twitter. I'm at Jon Rothstein. That's John, Jon. Without further ado, let's roll them out. Number 1, 5-star flop. What coaches do you feel have done the best job with the NIL era? Which coaches do you feel have struggled? Well, I will say a couple of coaches that have done great jobs with the NIL era. I'm going to say, first off, Dusty May, with the way he's continued to compose rosters at Michigan. I also think that you can say Ryan Odom at Virginia has done really, really well. And I also want to shout out, obviously, Jon Scheyer for the way he has adapted and kept Duke afloat. Which coaches do you feel have struggled? I think it's a blue blood thing. I think the coaches like Bill Self, Mark Pope, we obviously saw this a little bit with Hubert Davis at North Carolina. I think Mike Malone's done a pretty good job putting a roster together. But the allure of being in a situation where you do not sell a blue blood opportunity is now something that's a major adjustment for those coaches and those programs. Next question. Kyle Strickoff says, will Michigan add another player for the portal? Well, I wouldn't put anything past, Michigan in recruiting, but I have not heard Michigan linked to Tunde Yesufu or Milan Momcilovic or Alan Graves. Michigan obviously has invested a lot of money in J.P. Estrella and also Mustafa Cham. Michigan also has invested a lot in retaining Elliot Cadeau and Trey McKinney. So I wouldn't think, a player of significance. I think Michigan's team is pretty much set, Kyle. Adam Wassam says, John, thoughts on Mike Malone so far? It's Michael Malone, first of all. That's the first thing we got to call him Michael because that's how he prefers to be called. This is what I'll say about Mike Malone. I think North Carolina has put together a pretty good perimeter with Neo Avdalis, with Terrence Brown, with Matt Abel. Jaron Stevenson's a good piece that's back. Sayon Keita, obviously, up front is one of the best, probably from an athleticism perspective, 5 men in this class. I think North Carolina would have been a top 15-ish team with Henry Vessar back. They couldn't retain him. He went to the NBA draft. I think North Carolina is a top 25, top 30 team right now. I don't know, though, unless we see a major addition up front, if North Carolina is going to be a better team than we saw last year when obviously Caleb Wilson was healthy. Next question. The Valpo Vault. John, thoughts on Valpo this year after retaining a strong freshman class? Well, retention is obviously the main thing, especially at the mid-major level. I love Roger Powell. Loved him as a player. Loved him as an assistant coach at Gonzaga. And the one thing that I think is going to be more difficult than ever, especially now, is the pressure on these teams in these mid-major conferences in these one-bid conference tournaments. And I think you can go look at Casey Alexander, who was at Belmont last year and is now at Kansas State, had a great regular season, top team in the Valley, lost in the quarters, because that's the dark side of March. Next question. John, who is your favorite to win National Player of the Year in 2027? What a fascinating question. My favorite to win National Player of the Year. I have not done the deep thought into that just yet, but I think you could say John Blackwell, maybe, at Duke. I think he would be a candidate, but I would probably lean more at the Florida guys to start. I think you'd say Tommy Hauck. I think John Blackwell is going to put up big numbers for Duke in terms of being an All-American. I think Tommy Hauck is probably a better call in that regard. I think Trey McKinney is going to have a huge, huge season, as are the two UConn guards, Silas Demery and Braylon Mullins. I would expect certain guards to have big-time years like Jeremy Fears, and I also think a guy you got to keep in mind on your National Player of the Year watch an All-American watch is going to be Braden Huff, but that's where I would start. We'll see, obviously, what transpires with the NBA draft process. Does Malik Thomas come back? Jordan Smith's another name. But, yeah, I think those guys are probably good bets to keep an eye on. Also, want to keep, obviously, you on your toes on some other little news and notes from around the world of college basketball. We'll do that. We'll put a bow on this show when we return. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network. All right, Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network. Time to put a bow on this show, and as always, we give you some news and notes from around the world of college basketball. So without further ado, let's get the three good nuggets. Nugget number one, mid-December at the Mecca. Look at that three-day stretch right there at Madison Square Garden. On 12/19, we've got the CBS Sports Classic. Kansas now a part of the event, playing Ohio State. Kentucky taking on North Carolina, all at Madison Square Garden. That's a Saturday. On Sunday, UConn against Virginia, two top 10 teams going head-to-head. As we talked about earlier in the show, this is one, obviously, of UConn's monster non-conference games. Virginia expected to be a top 10 team in year two under Ryan Odom. And then on the 21st, you got Duke against Michigan, just like we had last year in Washington, D.C. John Blackwell, also Trey McKinney. Great theater right before Christmas at Madison Square Garden. I don't know if I have ever seen a three-day stretch like that at the world's most famous arena that was not a part of the Big East tournament in its heyday. Nugget number two, go West. A sneaky good non-conference home-and-home series that I came across last week. VCU and Santa Clara beginning a home-and-home series November 19th at Santa Clara next season. Return game at VCU in 27-28. I'm telling you, Santa Clara lost a lot of players to the portal, but was also able to retain a Sash Gavalugov, to retain an Ensminger. And now you've got a situation where Santa Clara, no Gonzaga in the league, Randy Bennett at Arizona State. Santa Clara would, because of the retention, because of what it got in the transfer portal, with David Castillo from Kansas State, with Sidney Gay from Arizona, Santa Clara could be the team to keep an eye on as the new team to beat in the West Coast Conference. Nugget number three, the natural gets rewarded. Talking about Iowa's Ben McCollum. Last week, McCollum, according to sources, received a new 6-year contract, led the Hawkeyes to 24 wins this past year, and a trip to the Elite Eight. Going to be real, real weird to see Ben McCollum operating without Bennett Sturtz at point guard, but that's what will happen. But a heck of a basketball coach and a well-deserved contract extension for McCollum. We need an Army with us for each and every show here on Inside College Basketball Now. And we need you to be all you can be. So a reminder, we will be back next Monday, same bad time, same bad channel. Also, keep it locked to Inside College Basketball Now during the week for exclusive interviews featuring some of the biggest and best names in the sport. I'm Jon Rothstein, and that was Inside College Basketball Now on CBS Sports Network.